Imagine a man. He saved the world in a big war. He led the United States when times were dark. You might think he would be a hero forever, but he was not. This is the story of Harry Truman. He was the boss. He made the hard choices. But then a young man came along. His name was John Kennedy. He was new, he was handsome, he was on TV. Kennedy did not just take Truman's job. Therefore, he pushed the old man away. He made people forget him. It was a quiet fight. It was a fight between the old days and the new days. Get ready. This is a story about power. It is a story about friends who become enemies. It shows what happens when the cameras turn on. Let us look back. We must see who Harry Truman was first. You need to know why he mattered. Truman did not start as a rich man. He was a farmer. He served in the first big war. He was just a regular person, but he worked very hard. Therefore, he climbed up the ladder. He became the vice president. Then something sad happened. President Roosevelt died. The whole country was in shock. The world was at war. Truman had to step up. He was the new leader, but he was scared. He told reporters he felt like the moon and stars fell on him. He had to be brave. The war was terrible. Millions were dying. Truman had to make a choice. It was the biggest choice in history. He decided to drop the atomic bomb. It was a scary weapon, but it ended the war. Therefore, the boys came home. Peace came back. But the world was still dangerous. A new enemy rose up. This was the Cold War. Russia wanted to take over. Truman stood firm. He helped Europe rebuild. He created plans to keep people safe. He showed the world that America was strong. People liked his style. He was tough. He spoke his mind. He had a sign on his desk. It said, "The buck stops here." That meant he took the blame. He did not hide. In 1948, he ran for president again. Everyone said he would lose. The newspapers were sure of it, but Truman did not quit. He got on a train. He traveled all over the land. He talked to real people. Therefore, he won. It was a huge surprise. He held up a newspaper that said he lost. He smiled. He had beaten the odds. He left office in 1953. He went back home to Missouri. He was not rich. He did not have a big company. He just lived in his house. He took walks. He wrote letters. People loved him for this. He was the grand old man of the party. You might think he was safe. You might think everyone would listen to him forever. He was the wise teacher. The party looked up to him. He had the experience. He knew how to run the White House, but time moves fast. The world was changing. The 1950s were ending. A new time was coming. Cars were faster, music was louder, and television was born. Truman was a man of the radio. He was a man of newspapers. He spoke simply. He did not care about makeup. He did not care about lighting. But the new voters did. They watched screens in their living rooms. They wanted to see something good. Truman sat in his library. He read history books. He thought the old rules would stay. He thought loyalty mattered most. Therefore, he expected the next leader to come to him. He expected to be asked for advice. He thought he was the gatekeeper, but he did not see what was coming. He did not see the change in the air. The country was young again. The soldiers from the war were having kids. Those kids were growing up. They did not want a they wanted someone like them. This made Truman proud. He wanted his party to win. But he had a specific idea of what a winner looked like. A winner looked like him. A winner was tough and serious. However, a new star was rising. This star was different. He was rich. He was polished. He knew how to smile for the camera. Truman watched this from far away. He felt uneasy. He felt a worry in his gut. He was the hero of the war. He saved the Western world, but heroes can be forgotten. Their statues can gather dust. Truman believed in respect. He believed you wait your turn. But in politics, people are hungry. They do not like to wait. Therefore, the respect Truman had was about to be tested. Age was set. The old lion was resting. He thought he was safe in his den. But outside, a young tiger was waking up. The clash was not loud at first. It was a whisper. But soon it would be a shout. Truman's legacy was huge. It was like a mountain. But even mountains can be hidden by fog. And a thick fog was rolling in. It was the fog of a new era. It was shiny and bright. And it had no room for an old farmer from Missouri. So, we have our hero. He is retired, he is respected, but he is also yesterday's news. He just does not know it yet. And that is where the pain begins. That is where the story turns. He thought he was the teacher, but he was about to learn a hard lesson. Now look at the other man. His name was John F. Kennedy. People called him JFK. He was very different from Truman. Truman grew up poor, but Kennedy grew up rich. His father had lots of money. His father wanted his sons to be powerful. JFK went to fancy schools. He wore nice suits. He traveled the world. Kennedy was young. He had a bad back. He was often sick. but you would not know it. On camera, he looked strong, he looked healthy, he had a big smile, he had thick hair, he looked like a movie star, he became a senator, he wrote a book. He won a prize for it. He was making a name for himself, but he was in a hurry. He did not want to wait. He wanted the big job. He wanted to be president. The year was 1960. America was ready for a change. The leader at the time was old. He was a general named Eisenhower. He was like a grandfather. The people were tired of grandfathers. They wanted energy. They wanted action. Therefore, Kennedy made a plan. He used something new. He used television. Before this, people only heard voices. They read words, but now they could see the candidate. Kennedy looked great on TV. He was calm. He was cool. He made jokes. Truman watched this on his set. He did not get it. He thought Kennedy was too young. He thought he was not ready. He called him a boy. Truman thought the White House was a serious place. It was not a place for boys, but Kennedy was smart. He knew the voters were changing. He talked about the new frontier. He said the old ways were not good enough. He said it was time to get moving again. This message worked. Young people loved it. They cheered for him. They screamed like he was a singer. Truman saw the crowds, but he was not impressed. He worried. He thought Kennedy bought his way in. He thought Kennedy's dad was pulling the strings. Truman valued hard work. He did not like shortcuts. Therefore, he spoke out. He told people to be careful. He said the job was too big for a young man. He wanted someone else. He wanted someone older. He wanted someone safe. But Kennedy did not care. He kept going. He won votes in small states. He won votes in big cities. His team was fast. They were modern. They used polls. They used ads. They ran circles around the old guard. This was a threat to Truman. If Kennedy won, it meant Truman was old. It meant his style was dead. It meant the party did not need him anymore. Kennedy knew he had a problem, though. He needed the party to unite. He needed the old people, too. Therefore, he had to be careful. He could not fight Truman in public. That would look bad. So, Kennedy played a game. He acted nice. He smiled at the old man. He said nice things about him. But in his head, he had a different plan. He knew he had to win without Truman. This was the start of the gap. One man stood for the past, the other stood for the future. One man used his gut, the other used a screen. Kennedy's rise was fast. It was like a rocket. It scared the old leaders. They felt the ground shake. They tried to stop him. They held meetings. They talked in back rooms. But nothing worked. The rocket was too fast. The country was falling in love. They loved Kennedy's wife too. She was pretty and smart. They were a perfect couple. They looked like royalty. Truman looked at his own life. He was simple. He was plain. He felt like an old shoe, comfortable but worn out. Kennedy was a shiny new shoe. This made Truman angry. He felt the party was losing its soul. He thought they cared more about looks than truth. He thought they cared more about winning than doing right. But the voters had spoken. They wanted the new face. They wanted the dream. Therefore, Kennedy became the nominee. He was the one chosen to run. Truman had to make a choice. He could stay home and pout, or he could help. He was a loyal man. He loved his party, so he decided to help, but he did not do it with a happy heart. He did it because he had to. Kennedy accepted the help, but he did not really need it, or at least he thought so. He felt strong. He felt the wind at his back. The conflict was clear. It was not just two men, it was two worlds. The world of the farm and the factory against the world of the city and the studio. Truman sat in his chair in Missouri. He watched the young man on the news. He saw the crowds cheering. He heard the loud music. That he knew a storm was coming, and he knew he could not stop the rain. He had been the most powerful man on earth. Now he was just a watcher. He was an audience member, and the show was starring someone else, someone who did not play by the old rules. This was the rise of the challenger. It was bright, it was loud, and for Harry Truman, it was a little bit scary. The shadow of the young man was growing long. It was starting to cover the old president. The cameras showed smiles, they showed handshakes, but real life is different. Behind closed doors, things were tense. Truman was not shy. He wrote letters. He spoke his mind. In the summer of 1960, he was very worried. He did not think Kennedy could win. He also worried about Kennedy's religion. Kennedy was Catholic. No Catholic had ever been president. Truman thought this would be a problem. He held a press conference. He stood in front of microphones. He asked a hard question. He said, "Are you certain you are ready?" He was talking to Kennedy, but he was asking the whole country. It was a sharp attack. It stung. Kennedy had to answer. He went on TV. He was polite. He said he was ready. He made a joke about Truman. He said Truman just wanted to help. He brushed the old man off. It was smooth. It was clever. But deep down, Kennedy was annoyed. He did not like being treated like a child. He was a grown man. He was a war hero too. He had saved his crew in the ocean. He felt he earned his spot. Truman's friends told him to stop. They said, "Harry, you're hurting us." They wanted to beat the other side. They wanted to beat Nixon. Nixon was the enemy. If Truman fought Kennedy, Nixon might win. Therefore, Truman had to swallow his pride. He had to stop talking bad about the boy. He had to start saying good things. This was hard for him. He was a stubborn man. Kennedy knew he needed to fix this. He could not have the former president hating him. It looked bad. So he visited Truman. He went to the library in Missouri. Imagine the scene. The young, tall senator walks in. The older, shorter man greets him. They shake hands. They smile for the pictures, but the air is cold. They went into a private room. No reporters were allowed. We do not know every word they said, but we know the feeling. Kennedy asked for help. He asked Truman to campaign for him. Truman said yes. He said, "I am a Democrat. I will help the party." But he did not say, "I like you." There is a difference. He was doing a job. He was being a good soldier. So Truman went on the road. He gave speeches. He told people to vote for Kennedy. He used his loud voice. He waved his arms. The crowds loved him. They shouted, "Give 'em hell, Harry!" But Kennedy's team was watching. They were nervous. Truman was loose. He said wild things. Sometimes he used bad words. Kennedy's team wanted to be proper. They wanted to be fancy. Truman was too rough for them. They started to keep him away from the main stage. They sent him to smaller towns. They did not put him on TV with Kennedy very often. They used him, but they hid him a little bit. Truman sensed this. He was not stupid. He knew when he was being pushed aside. He wrote to his wife, Bess. He told her about his doubts. He felt used. He felt like a prop. But the election was close. It was very tight. Kennedy needed every vote. He needed the farmers. Those were Truman's people, so they kept the peace. Election night came. It was a long night. Truman stayed up late. He watched the numbers. Finally, Kennedy won. It was by a tiny bit. But a win is a win. Kennedy was now the president-elect. He was the boss. Truman sent a telegram. He said congratulations. He offered his help again. He thought, now he will call me. Now he will ask me how to run the country. But the phone did not ring very often. Kennedy was busy. He was picking his new team. He picked young men. He picked men from colleges. He picked men from business. He did not pick Truman's old friends. This hurt Truman. He saw his legacy fading. He saw his people being replaced. The White House was changing. Kennedy did one nice thing. He invited Truman to the White House after he won. Truman came back to his old home. He saw the changes. He saw the new drapes. He saw the new furniture. It was a symbolic moment. The old king visiting the new king. Kennedy was charming. He showed Truman around. He called him Mr. President, but it was clear who was in charge. Kennedy walked in front. Truman walked behind. Kennedy spoke to the press. Truman stood to the side. The power had shifted. It was a physical thing. You could see it in their bodies. Kennedy stood tall. Truman looked smaller. Behind closed doors, the truth was plain. Kennedy respected Truman's history, but he did not want his input. He thought Truman was from the past, and Kennedy was building the future. He did not want to hear stories about 1948. He wanted to talk about 1960. He wanted to talk about space. He wanted to talk about missiles. Truman went back to Missouri. He sat at his desk. He realized the truth. He had helped the boy win, but in winning, he had made himself obsolete. He had helped build the world that didn't need him anymore. The letters stopped coming as often. The visits stopped. The silence grew loud. Truman had done his duty, but the reward was loneliness. He was out of the game. And that is a hard place for a fighter to be. The new age had begun. They called it Camelot. This was a name for a magical castle. It was full of knights and ladies. It was beautiful. It was perfect. But in this castle, there was no seat for the old warrior. Truman was left outside the gate. The erasure did not happen with a bang. It happened slowly. It was quiet. It was like sand slipping through fingers. Kennedy took office in January. It was a cold day. Snow was on the ground. Truman was there. He sat on the platform. He watched Kennedy take the oath. He watched the young man stand without a coat. Kennedy looked tough. He looked brave. Truman clapped. He smiled. But then the ceremony ended. The crowds followed Kennedy. The cameras followed Kennedy. Truman got in a car and went to the train station. He went home. In the months that followed, the White House changed. It became a center of culture. There were parties with artists. There were famous musicians. There were poets. It was very fancy. Truman's White House had been simple. They played poker. They drank bourbon. They told jokes. Kennedy's White House drank wine, French, philosophy. The newspapers wrote about Jackie Kennedy's dresses. They wrote about the president's hair. They wrote about his kids playing under the desk. It was a soap opera, and the whole country watched. Truman read the papers. He saw how the story was changing. The writers began to say that the 1950s were boring. They said the old days were grey. They painted Kennedy as the sun that chased the clouds away. This meant Truman was part of the grey. He was part of the boring past. His hard work was being painted over. Kennedy faced big problems too. He had trouble in Cuba. He had trouble in Berlin. When these things happened, people wondered, will he call Truman? Will he ask the man who dropped the bomb? But he usually did not. Kennedy had his own team. He had his brother, Bobby. He had smart men from Harvard. They thought they knew best. They thought Truman's way was too blunt. They wanted to be subtle. There is a story about a lunch. Truman came to visit. He wore his best suit. He was excited. He thought they would talk about strategy. He thought they would look at maps. But the lunch was just social. It was just for show. They ate food. They made small talk. Kennedy was nice, but he didn't ask, "Harry, what should I do?" Truman left feeling empty. He told a friend, "He didn't ask me a damn thing." The pain was real. It is hard to be an expert and have no one listen. The media played a part in this too. They loved the news story. They wanted to sell papers. Youth sells papers. Excitement sells papers. An old man in Missouri does not sell papers. So Truman faded from the news. Unless it was his birthday or unless he was sick, they did not cover him. He became a statue before he was dead. He was a piece of history, not a piece of the present. This is how the erasure works. It is not mean. It is not violent. It is just indifferent. That means they just don't care. They move on. Kennedy's team managed the image perfectly. They made sure Kennedy looked like he invented the presidency. They made it seem like everything before was old-fashioned. Truman watched the Bay of Pigs invasion. It was a disaster. He watched the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was scary. He supported the president in public. He said, "Stand by the president." He was loyal to the end, but privately, he worried. He wondered if experience would have helped. He wondered if his steady hand was missed. The Camelot myth grew stronger. It was about style. It was about youth. It was about being cool. Truman was never cool. He was hot. He was fiery. The contrast was sharp. One man was black and white film. The other was Technicolor. One man was a written letter. The other was a live broadcast. By the middle of Kennedy's term, Truman was a distant figure. He was like a distant relative you visit once a year. You respect him, but you don't invite him to the party. This hurt Truman's pride, but it also hurt his heart. He loved the job. He loved the country. He wanted to be useful. He spent his days at his library. He talked to students. He told them about the Constitution. He told them about the war. He tried to keep his version of history alive. He knew that if he didn't tell it, it might disappear. He saw how powerful the new machine was. The Kennedy machine could rewrite history. It could make things look better than they were. Truman was honest to a fault. He did not like spin, but spin was the new way. Image was everything. And in the war of images, the young prince defeats the old king every time. So Truman sat in Independence, Missouri. The world spun on. The rockets went to space. The music changed, and the man who saved the world became a footnote in the morning paper. He was a guest in the house he used to own. Why does this story matter? It is not just about two men. It is about all of us. It is about how the world turned. This was a war between generations. It happens in every family. It happens in every business. The old build the house, the young move in and paint the walls. Truman represented the greatest generation. These were the people who fought the Depression. They fought the Nazis. They were tough. They did not complain. They valued loyalty. They valued duty. They did things by the book. Kennedy represented the new generation. They were born in better times. They had more money. They had more freedom. They wanted to question the rules. They wanted to change the style. They valued speed. They valued image. When these two forces crash, there is always pain. The old feel disrespected. So the young feel held back. Truman felt that Kennedy was ungrateful. He felt that Kennedy did not know the weight of the burden. He thought Kennedy treated the presidency like a trophy. For Truman, it was a heavy cross to carry. Kennedy felt that Truman was stuck. He felt Truman was too slow. He thought the old ways were dangerous in a nuclear age. He wanted to try new paths. This clash tells us something about power. Power is rented. You do not own it. You hold it for a little while, then you have to give it up. Giving it up is the hardest part. It is hard to watch someone else drive your car. It is hard to watch someone else sit at your desk. You think, I can do it better. You think they are making a mistake. But you cannot stop the clock. The new generation always wins. They have time on their side. The story also shows us the power of the media. This was the first time looks mattered so much. Before this, a president could be fat. He could be bald. He could be grumpy. It did not matter as much as his ideas. But after Kennedy, You had to look the part. You had to be a celebrity. Truman was the last of the 19th century men. Kennedy was the first of the 20th century stars. This shift changed politics forever. It became a show. It became about sound bites. It became about hair and teeth. Truman would not have survived in this new world. He was too real. He was too raw. We must also look at the sadness of it. Truman wanted to be a mentor. A mentor is a teacher. He wanted to guide the young man. He wanted to say, watch out for this trap. Be careful of that leader. But the student did not want a teacher. The student thought he knew enough. This is a common tragedy. We lose so much wisdom because we do not listen to the elders. Truman took his wisdom to the grave. He wrote it down, yes, but he could not whisper it in the president's ear. That is a loss for the country. Kennedy missed out too. He had energy, he had brain, but he lacked the deep scars of experience that Truman had. Truman had walked through fire. He knew how it felt to be burned. Kennedy was still learning. If they had worked together, imagine what they could have done. The energy of the youth mixed with the wisdom of the age. It could have been a powerful team, but ego got in the way. Pride got in the way, and the nature of politics got in the way. In politics, there is only one captain. You cannot have two hands on the wheel. So they drifted apart. The gap between them was wide. It was not just an age gap, it was a culture gap. We see this today. We see young people fighting with old people about how to fix the world. We see the old saying, respect us. We see the young saying, move over. It is the same story, just different names. Truman and Kennedy acted out a drama that is as old as time. The father and the son, the king and the prince, the master and the apprentice. It is a story of replacement, and replacement always hurts. It feels like death. It feels like you don't matter. Truman had to find peace. He had to find a way to be happy without the power. He had to realize that his work was done. The statue was built. He did not need to polish it every day. Kennedy had to learn that being new is not enough. You also have to be right. You have to be wise. The generational warfare left scars on the party. It created cracks, but it also pushed the country forward. Sometimes you need a push. Sometimes the old ways do need to go, but we should not forget the cost. The cost is the dignity of the old soldier. The cost is the lost advice. The cost is the feeling of betrayal. Truman sat on his porch. He watched the sun go down. He knew his time in the sun was over, but he also knew he had done his best. And maybe in the end, that has to be enough. The story has a sudden twist, a tragic twist. In November 1963, the unthinkable happened. President Kennedy was killed. He was shot in Dallas. The bright light was snuffed out. The young prince was gone. Truman was shocked. He was devastated. He knew the burden of the job. He knew the danger, but he never expected this. When the news broke, reporters ran to Truman's house, wanted a quote. They wanted to see the old man cry, but Truman just felt a deep sorrow. He knew what the family was feeling. This tragedy changed everything again. Kennedy became a legend. He was frozen in time. He would always be young. He would always be beautiful. The Camelot story became holy. You could not say a bad word about it. This pushed Truman even further into the shadows. You cannot compete with a ghost. You cannot compete with a martyr. But in a strange way, it also brought people back to Truman. The new president was Lyndon Johnson. Johnson was more like Truman. He was older, he was rougher, he knew how to talk to politicians. Johnson reached out to Truman. He invited him back. He signed a bill with Truman by his side. It was for Medicare. It was a health plan for old people. Truman had wanted this for years. Now it was real and he was there to see it. It was a nice moment. It was a moment of respect. But the years were passing. Truman was getting frail. He walked slower. His memory faded. He spent his final years thinking about his life. He thought about the decisions he made. He wondered how history would judge him. He died in 1972. He was 88 years old. The country mourned him. They remembered the man who sold shirts and became president. They remembered the man who ended the war. But for a long time, Kennedy's shadow covered him. Kennedy was the star. Truman was the black and white photo in the history book. It took many years for things to balance out. Today, we look back. We see both men clearly. We see Kennedy's charm, but we also see his mistakes. We see Truman's roughness, but we also see his courage. Historians started to rank the presidents. Truman began to climb the list. People realized that being boring can be good. Being steady is important. So, what is the lesson for us? What do we take away from this tale of two men? First, we learn that fame is fleeting. The crowds cheer today, but they leave tomorrow. You cannot build your happiness on applause. Truman knew this. He always said, Do your duty and history will take care of itself. Second, we learn about loyalty. Truman was loyal to a fault. Kennedy was loyal to his ambition. Both are powerful forces. But ambition can be cold. It can leave people behind. Third, we think about how we treat our elders. Do we listen to them? Or do we push them aside because they don't know how to use the new tools? Truman had wisdom even if he didn't have a TV smile. Imagine if you were Truman. You saved the world, then you're treated like a piece of old furniture. How would you feel? Would you be bitter? Or would you be graceful? Truman tried to be graceful, but he was human. He was hurt. It is okay to admit that. And imagine if you were Kennedy. You want to change the world. You want to move fast. The old man keeps telling you to slow down. He keeps telling you how it used to be. Would you listen? Or would you run past him? Kennedy ran. That is what young people do. It is the nature of life, but there is a hidden cost. When we run too fast, we miss things. We miss the lessons of the past. We make mistakes that could have been avoided. The relationship between Truman and Kennedy was a missed chance. It was a bridge that was never built. Today we have their library. They are both great buildings. They hold the papers and the secrets, but they stand far apart. One is in Missouri, one is in Boston. They are separated by miles, and they are separated by style. But in our minds, we should put them side by side. We should look at the plain man and the polished man. We need both kinds of leaders. We need the steady hand and the bright spark. The tragedy is that they could not see this. They could not bridge the gap. So as you watch the leaders of today, look closely. Look past the makeup, look past the tweets and the video. Look for the substance, look for the character. And remember Harry Truman. Remember the man who walked away from power with no regrets. Remember the man who was sidelined. He showed us that true dignity doesn't come from a title. It comes from within. He was not the King of Camelot. He was just a citizen. And maybe that is the highest title of all. Now ask yourself, who do you root for? The star who captures the imagination or the worker who gets the job done? The answer tells you a lot about who you are. The story of Truman and Kennedy is over, but the wheel keeps turning. The new becomes old, the young become the elders, and the cycle begins again. We leave them now, two men in history, tied together yet worlds apart.